Today we're going to make our first foray into the record books. We're going to begin with this one. This is record book number 1 in the sequence. And we're going to be reading a couple of entries and learning about the soldiers who wrote those entries, and then also the context surrounding their entries, a broader historical perspective, and then a perspective on their life. So I'll give a little bio of what I was able to find on them. Some of them I've been able to find photos and letters and stuff in their paperwork that is not common to find. There's a dearth of information on individual soldiers in the rank and file, people that are not officers, specifically privates. Lance corporals and sergeants are kind of lumped in with those because they were not commissioned officers, NCOs. That is the rank that we see the most of in here: privates, sergeants, lance corporals. It's pretty easy to find, well, not easy. It's easier to find information on lieutenants and upwards because they had more of a presence bureaucratically, and they were often from higher class, well educated or better educated than the non-commissioned officers and the privates. They often came from wealthy, well-known families, like Rudyard Kipling, Rudyard Kip. Oh, this guy. People like him had sons that were automatically commissioned into officer status, first lieutenant, second lieutenant, and upward. Their simple presence is just enough to have more concrete documents and sources for their life and their military career, especially if they died. If these officers died, then the paperwork is even easier to find, and there's more of it. So non-commissioned officers and privates, however, usually the only thing you're going to be able to find are medal roll paperwork. So just like a little card that says their name, their battalion, their service number, and then did they get the 1914-15 star? Did they get the victory medal? Whatever, were they killed in action? Just like two little pieces of paper is basically all that's left of these soldiers online, at least. I'm sure there's more information out there somewhere, but not everybody gets the chance to look through their ancestors' documents. Not everybody has the desire to share it with other people in the historical community and beyond. And then sometimes it just doesn't exist. It got lost. It got thrown away. It burned up in a house fire, which is really, really sad. But for a lot of them, I was able to find some pretty good chunks of information, photos. I found an X-ray of a guy's foot. I found that gay love story cover-up. I think he's in this first record book, so I'm very excited to get to that one. But we're going page by page. I'm going to be going page by page and or chronologically. So the books are already basically chronologic. They are basically already organized by chronology. There's 4 books, and they go in order from 1916 to 1918. Anyway, it's easier to find information if you come across a soldier who was Australian or Canadian or from New Zealand, because those countries have way better archives and digitization. It's pretty sad. It makes me sad that there's a really good chance I'll never know anything else, anything more than what I already know about these soldiers, but I always hold out hope because part of me thinks that if I'm making these videos and I'm putting this content out there, maybe their great-great-grandchildren are going to say, oh my gosh, I have pictures of him. I have his diary. I have his, whatever that happened with the nurse, with Sister Bertie Lance. Hey, I saw your content. That's my family member. And from there, we were able to communicate and exchange information. And then they sent me some wonderful pictures. And through that, I was able to see pictures of her childhood home and her parents and her siblings. My fingers are crossed that I'll be able to get more knowledge out of it because I'm always looking for more knowledge. I will give a brief caveat / disclaimer. When I'm reading the transcriptions of what's in the record books, I have added in punctuation, fixed spelling errors, and generally just kind of like cleaned it up so that I could read it in my mind how I am pretty sure that it's meant to be read. A lot of the men were not well educated beyond like grade school, so neither they nor their parents would have been very good at writing if they were not from an affluent background. Just bear that in mind. I fixed the grammar errors in the transcripts that I'm reading, but when I show you the front pages, you might not see that punctuation if you can read the handwriting, which is really wild. Transcribing these things was a big challenge. I enjoyed every second of it, but it was a challenge. So anyway, I just wanted to make that clear because if I didn't add in the punctuation, it would have been very hard for me to read. As far as primary sources go, that's kind of like a gray area. If I was going to print out those transcriptions and put them in my book, I'm still kind of like waffling back and forth between how I should quote those. If I should leave the grammar errors in and just have one little tiny sick in brackets at the end of it to denote that the grammar errors are inherent. If anybody has any insight on that, I would really like some feedback. Anyway, we're going to get into it. We're going to be reading 2 entries today and hopefully getting some context on the soldiers and their lives, what they were going through at the time that they made entries. And then broader overall context of the war and how it related to their entries. So sit back, get cozy, and we're going to talk about World War I.
Lance Corporal W. Budworth, Distinguished Conduct Medal. HQ Company, 2nd Battalion, Northamptonshire Regiment, BEF. Rough description of what part the battalion took in the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle on the 10th of March, 1915. We were doing 3 days in and 3 days out. We went in the trenches on the night of the 5th of March for our 3 nights. But we had to stop on the night of the 9th. We had a draft to make us up to a good strength at about midnight. They had never heard a shot fired before, so you can tell how they felt. About 1 o'clock, the captain came around and told us what was coming off in the morning, and he wanted all the barbed wire fetched in off the stakes. So I and 9 privates fetched it all in, and left the stakes standing. All was quiet regarding the German side, but there was a bustle of troops on the British side. The Lincolns were shoved into an old disused fire trench, and the Berkshires were on their right, and then came the Indians. Everything was ready before daylight came, and when it did come, there was a terrific row. It seemed as if all the guns were drawn up for the occasion. These continued for 3/4 of an hour. Our own trenches quivered just like a jelly. As soon as the guns stopped, there was a whistle blown. The front line of attackers started, and they were amongst the Germans before you could look around. The first line was ours. The Northampton's job was to consolidate the Germans' line and also to pull the barricade down, and it was as bad as attacking. The first line shoved the Germans nearly through the village. When the order came for the 24th Brigade to advance, we formed up for the attack in columns of platoons, and our colonel blew his whistle to advance in short, sharp rushes, he himself remaining in front of the battalion. And so we rushed until we drove the Germans back to the woods, and here we met a check because the Germans had got their reinforcement up, and it began to get dark, so we commenced to dig ourselves in. On the morning of the 11th, all the guns opened, both ours and the Germans, and it was a sight. Our own shells and the Germans were dropping amongst us. As soon as they had finished, our colonel gave the order that 1 platoon of each company was to charge. The whole 4 platoons mustered, 100 strong, the colonel still leading. We got halfway when their machine guns simply mowed us down. 10 men and 1 officer got back to the colonel. Then it was the German's turn. He counterattacked 3 times, but got repulsed. The 3rd day was not so bad, but we had not touched water nor food for 3 days. About midnight on the 13th, the Devons relieved us, and we retired to the divisional reserve trenches, and then formed up for a muster roll call. We were just over 100 strong, with the colonel and 2 officers, which were found to be insane. The colonel went to report to General Carter, our brigadier, when he got shot in the lungs, but still lived. The same day, I saw the Prince of Wales walking up and down the La Bassée road. Just after, we got a rum issue and a good square meal. But I shall never forget the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle as long as I live. With best wishes to Sister Lance, W. Budworth.
All right, we're talking about Lance Corporal William Budworth. Let's read what we know about Mr. Budworth. William Budworth was a lance corporal in the 2nd Northamptonshire Regiment HQ Company. He served with the 2nd Battalion even before the war, under the service number 5375, and re-enlisted in 1914. He also served with the Northumberland Fusiliers. He resided at 49 Devonshire Cottages, Barrow Hill, Chesterfield, and before the war was a furnace filler for Stavely Coal and Iron Company. He had married his wife Esther Ellen in 1905, and as of 1914 had 5 children: Esther Mary, William Francis, Elsie, Violet, and Phyllis May. His next of kin was his father, who resided at 40 Leicester Street, Kettering. He was admitted to the 22nd General Hospital in 1916 at age 36. He was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal in 1916, quote, for consistent good work as a sniper in the trenches. The smallness of the losses in the battalion from the enemy's snipers is largely due to his skill and courage. He's also done good work patrolling in our front lines, end quote. So in his service paperwork, where is it? Mr. Budworth, where are you? You know, sometimes I wish that the National Archives had not been bombed during World War II, because the reason that there's so few service records for English soldiers was because in World War II, the place where they were being stored blew up. So the ones that remain are also burned and scorched and sometimes not intact. They look like something you'd find in a horror video game. Anyway, yeah, so he was recommended for the Distinguished Conduct Medal by his lieutenant. He received the recommendation on March 25th, 1916. I can't tell what the top of the paper is burned off, so I can't tell like exactly what source it's from, but it is in the document, which I downloaded from the available records on Ancestry.com. There's also a letter from his wife, Esther. She writes to the War Office, my husband being away a month today and not having nothing since he went, I am waiting for you to see how I have been left. I am been left with 5 little children, enclosing me by doing something, letting me have the certificate. Also, I am, dear sir, yours truly, Mrs. W. Budworth, 49 Devonshire Cottages, etc., etc. All of these images are just deep fried. They're very high resolution, high fidelity, but they're not easy to read. He was discharged as no longer physically fit for war service in 1917, and after the war, he went to work with horses. When he was discharged, it was noted that he had knowledge of how to handle horses and that he could work as that in civilian life. This is interesting because he was honorably discharged due to a disabling head wound from shrapnel. He had served as an officer's groom during the war, so he applied to work with horses after the war. Those two things might seem like they're not related at all. However, the disabling head wound from shrapnel is telling because it harkens to this fact that this war was more disabling than a lot of other wars due to the weaponry, specifically the shrapnel. So the bombs were stuffed with nails and pieces of other exploded shells and dentures and anything sharp that you found on the ground. You would put it in these and they would explode at such a rate where even just being next to one could just kill you instantly. But they sent the shrapnel out at a speed that it could take your whole face off, basically, which is horrifying. But it happened to so many people that the soldiers that had sustained these injuries were taken to a special hospital and cared for by a surgeon called Harold Gillies. Harold, our man, the subject of this book, The Facemaker by Lindsay Fitzharris. He literally invented plastic surgery. Plastic surgery is not called plastic surgery because they use plastic. I know it's like, oh man, she looks so plastic. She's had all this work done. It's called plastic because before the invention of plastic, like the plastic that we know, this kind of plastic was an adjective. It meant like stretchy or malleable or moldable. So plastic surgery actually refers to the reconstruction of faces because faces are stretchy and like skin is stretchy. Harold Gillies figured out how to mold a face after a maxillofacial injury, maxillofacial face jaw. dentistry was really important in this discovery. This book was one that was on my reading list for a really long time. And I was like, I have to read this book because that is fascinating and it very much pertains to my research. I was just reading along. All of a sudden, the 22nd General Hospital shows up, and I'm like, what? Because the 22nd General Hospital was not well known, really. Like, if you search 22nd General Hospital on the internet, you have to dig through stuff to find references to it beyond, like, oh yeah, this is where the Harvard Medical Unit went. We'll get to that. The 22nd General Hospital is not like a big, huge thing in the war. It's not like if you say the Battle of the Somme, obviously, even a layman who has taken a class on World War One would know what that is. If you say Hill 60, which is less well known but still a thing that happened, a person who was like tangentially interested in World War One would probably know what that is. The 22nd General Hospital was in a town 40 miles from the front, run by this group of 1,000 individuals from Harvard. It's just not anywhere. Like, I couldn't find it for a little while when I first started researching this. It's in this book. Apparently, Harold Gillies was working at the 22nd General Hospital. I did not know this when I went into the book. It showed up, and I was like, I'm sorry. Somebody else knows about this? He was from New Zealand. He went to Cambridge, and during the war, he returned to Britain to work as a doctor. He worked with a dentist, Dr. Burashtad H. Kazanjian, also a pioneer plastic surgeon, working specifically with jaw wounds and teeth. He was one of the first dentists employed by the British Army because they didn't employ dentists really until 1916, so that was a fun time for them. He and Harold Gillies worked together to pioneer the art of plastic surgery because faces are very squishy, and during the war, the likelihood of suffering from a facial injury was way higher. They had to figure out how to rebuild people's noses and give people prostheses for jaws that had just been blown off. If you Google these images, massive trigger warning. Massive trigger warning for this book as well. It's extremely disturbing, just haunting pictures. But they also worked with artists to do like a before and after image of the man, like after he had received his wound versus after he had had the plastic surgery. Harold Gillies invented the technique of the walking stock skin flap, also known as a tube pedicle. They would try to rebuild a guy's nose, and the material of his nose would kind of just rot. So with the tubed pedicle, he could take like a flap of skin, and attach it to the nose to keep the blood flow going while he, did some surgical maneuvering to rebuild the nose. When he couldn't physically recreate somebody's face using plastic surgery, he worked with sculptors to make masks that would, like, those glasses with the plastic frame and the fake nose that you put on, and it's like, it's got a mustache and stuff. Basically, that's exactly what they did. Obviously more realistic, and I think they were made of a very light substance, so that they wouldn't be so heavy on a person's face. But basically, they could put, a fake eye in, and then it would have an eyebrow and some like cheekbone material and a nose, and then maybe a mustache to cover a lip that didn't exist anymore, and they were held on with glasses. Back to William Budworth, the fact that he received a disabling head wound from shrapnel, that is a pretty good sign that he had suffered one of these really brutal injuries. They had special hospitals that didn't have mirrors in them because their morale after seeing their face when it had been destroyed would just like wipe out their will to live. Really, really tragic. And there's several men in the record books that had these kind of wounds listed on their paperwork for reasons why they were discharged. Sometimes they weren't discharged. If the wounds weren't completely disfiguring, they would be sent back to the trenches after their wound was healed. Very frequently, it was sewed up at a dressing station, and then they were just like taken to a hospital until they healed a little bit, and then they'd send them right back to the trenches. Really, really brutal process of being admitted to a hospital after this kind of wound and then sometimes sent back versus going to the Queen's Hospital at Sidcup. that sounds like a condiment. It's like ketchup's evil brother. William Budworth, this is the information I've been able to find on him so far. There's a possibility that he is in the records from this special hospital that Harold Gillies basically founded. I love when something in a book connects to something in my research and vice versa, because it's like, I found it. And another thing that I have in the digitized documents that I have found throughout the years from the Western Daily Press, Friday, 18th of June, 1915, there is a little chunk of a newspaper article talking about how the second lieutenant, G.F. Blacker of his battalion, had been killed. The newspaper article details some letters and the circumstances of his death, like saying, like, my sympathies, here's what I remember seeing, here's how it happened. When writing to the parents, especially of an officer, it was very common to just say, like, he died instantly, he didn't feel anything, he died doing his service, this is how he would have chosen to go out, it was a noble death, he faced it like a man. Those phrases are just everywhere in letters where one soldier is writing to another soldier's family of the soldier's death. William Budworth was in Lieutenant Blacker's company, and he wrote to the lieutenant's father, although your son was reported missing, you can be of the same opinion as the remainder of the men of the company that were left after the charge, that he still lies out on the open field close to the Germans' trenches. Not only your son, but also Captain Ward Hunt and the other officers who were in charge of platoons. No doubt they will get brought in eventually. I'm sure you've got the deepest sympathy from all of the men of A Company. Your son was well liked and respected, and he was a good sportsman, and I am sure he died a hero's death, as we all knew what to expect as soon as we got over the parapet. So after they charged out of the trenches, he was saying, like, we all knew what we were getting into. I'm sorry. That, honestly, that letter is a lot more blunt than I typically expect from a person writing to somebody's father in, like, sympathy and being like, yeah, I'm sorry your son died. Kind of feel bad for the dad, honestly. That was kind of harsh. Who's next? B. Jeffrey.
Private B. Jeffrey, 2nd Battalion, 4th Company, 1st Canadian Contingent. With best wishes to all the sisters at the 22nd General Hospital, I am now writing a few lines of the trenches. On the 26th of April of this year, we had a hot time at Hill 60, when the enemy bombarded us from 2 to 4 hours and also sprung a mine on us in the front line of the trench, and then the enemy charged us but could not drive us out of our trenches. We beat them back, killing and wounding a great number of them. The Huns found Canadians right on the job when they were wanted. Well, we decided to give them as much of it as possible if they tried to come at us again, but they left us alone the remainder of the time we were in the trenches that time. We came out of the trenches on the 3rd day of May and went in reserve till the 18th of the month, and then went back until the 26th of the month, and then went into the Belgium Chateau in reserve. I was there for 4 days, when they shelled the place, and I got hit, and then came to the 22nd General, and found all the sisters very kind to everyone, and also the doctors, and also the orderlies. There's a good time with the boys at the 22nd General.
His first name was Burton Jeffrey, private in the 2nd Canadian Infantry, 45th Victoria Regiment, 4th Company. He apparently also served with the 39th Battalion. He lived with his next of kin, his wife Susan, at 24 Stratton Avenue, Fairbank, Toronto, Ontario. He was born in Newmarket, Suffolk, England. He listed his trade as bricklayer on his attestation paperwork. Upon his admittance to the 22nd General Hospital in June of 1916 for a gunshot wound to the right thigh, he was 35 years of age. In August of that same year, at the sum, he received a shrapnel wound to the face and arm, which evidently caused him to lose teeth and require the amputation of his left arm 5 inches above the wrist. Because of this, in 1918, he was discharged as medically unfit for further service. Gee, I wonder why. He received the Victory and British War Medals for his service. He passed away on May 1st, 1958. So wild that the first 2 entries in the first record book both got discharged because of a shrapnel wound to the face. That is a coincidence. That's wild. There were many of these facial injuries, as I mentioned, but the fact that there was like one right after the other is just like because Private Jeffrey was Canadian, he has a very, very clear, well-documented, high-definition, not burnt and scalded and scorched enlistment paper document. Canada and Australia and New Zealand were very good about keeping their documents kind of together and then also digitizing them and making them available for free. If you want the British documents, you have to have an Ancestry.com subscription, or go to your library. Libraries often have it for free, and I use that a lot. I used that a lot when I was researching. I can't afford a subscription to Ancestry.com as much as I would love to be able to afford it. British, you have to pay to you have to go through Ancestry.com to find the records, but Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, you don't. Okay, here's some more information on the wound that discharged him from the military. Shrapnel, left hand, face, and right knee. Left forearm amputated 5 inches above the wrist joint. Elbow movement normal. Stump healed. Scar adherent to bone. Not tender. Loss of 7 teeth from wound in face. He enlisted pretty early on in the war. Did Budworth enlist early on in the war? I'm remembering somebody who enlisted like the day the war started. Yeah, it looks like he did enlist in 1914. So the earlier that a man enlisted in the war, obviously, the chance of their living went down. But these two men both survived the war. I don't remember what I was going to say. Should I do a blooper reel? I feel like that would be like longer than the actual video I'm trying to make. Oh, hang on. I saw the word Epsom. Let's find out about the Epsom Hospital. Okay, it was a military convalescent hospital in the Great War. Also a type of salt. Oh my god, it has lists of all of the soldiers that were admitted. Guess not, because it doesn't have Burton Jeffrey. Anyway, the reason I was wondering if he enlisted early on in the war was because in the early months, you had to have permission from your wife to enlist. So he did. His wife gave him permission to go. The reason why enlistment paperwork can be so useful is because when I saw the entry, the only thing I knew about him was what he put in the entry. I knew his name, I knew his service number, I knew his battalion. Sometimes they list their address, sometimes they list the ward they were in. So that information was the only thing I had to go off of. Luckily, most of the countries do maintain some information about them on various different sites on the National Archives, or maybe they have a special project of like digitizing letters and photographs. So enlistment paperwork can be really good for finding out extra information, like what date he was admitted to the 22nd General Hospital, because they list that on casualty paperwork. They list the date, they list where he had gone and where he had come from to get to the 22nd General Hospital, what he was admitted for. Sometimes, a wound, it could be a fever, it could be shell shock. And then also you can find out what his profession was before the war. And sometimes if they list that and you know what town he's from his enlistment paperwork, you can go to that business and learn about the business. And sometimes if the business is still in business, you can contact them and ask about their archives, because lots of companies have their own archives. That's always worth checking out. So just like the smallest little detail, something that's super innocuous that like you look at it and you're like, okay, cool, that's very straightforward. If you know the steps to take and the places that you can go to find further information about that, it might actually help you identify who the person was, even if you start out with one little tiny piece of information like a signature. So that's really why I think archives work and digitization of this kind of thing can be extremely helpful for researchers, because Mr. Burton Jeffrey, like, who in the world knows who this man is anymore? There might be some person who's like 80 years old and they remember their grandparent or their uncle or maybe their parent talking about the war, but they never wrote any of it down and they didn't want to talk about it because it was really traumatizing. This is like the record of that person's existence. This and the autograph book that they wrote in. Having just this small piece of information can help like reach back in time and pull that person up to the present and say, like, here's their life, which I think is really like beautiful. It's very sad quite often, but it is important. That wraps up the first episode of the Record Books play-by-play. The letters from the 22nd General Hospital. I don't really even know what to call this series, because I'm not talking about a specific topic. I'm talking about topics plural in a diary entry in an autograph book. So I want to have that kind of specified to be separate from the main broader video essays. I'll figure out a name eventually. Yeah. Anyway, follow me on TikTok. Forget Me Not History is the username. You can find shorter versions of these videos and memes and other stuff like that. I'm debating making a new Twitter, the website formerly known as Twitter, but it kind of is a trash fire right now, so I don't know that I really want to. I don't want to get into that, you know. I do already have a Twitter. The username is Birdie Lance. I barely use it. If you guys are interested, I would be happy to start an Instagram account or Blue Sky or Mastodon, maybe. I don't know. Can you even do that with Mastodon? Threads? Try Threads. But if it's easier for you to access this content and follow along with the account in another format other than YouTube or in addition to YouTube, let me know. I'm willing to try it. I am kind of a grandpa though, so don't expect something extremely impressive. But yeah, I will be back soon with another video. And the rest is history.